John Wyatt of the East Surrey Regiment was captured by the Japanese at Singapore and forced to work on the Thai-Burma Railroad. Of all his experiences as a Japanese prisoner of war, John found that the greatest horror of it all was the sea voyage to Japan on 2 Japanese hell ships. John begins with a description of the first ship, the Osaka Maru.
It was already 50 years old. It had been built in Glasgow in 1894, and the Japanese bought it in 1934 from the British government and renamed it. There were 750 of us, all suffering mostly dysentery, beriberi, malaria from the Burma Railway, and that's the condition we got the ships. And they put us in this hold. It's about the size of this room here, and we had to sit there, and you couldn't move. And there was rats running across our faces, and we were there for about 2 or 3 days, and we couldn't move, and there was just a ladder there leading up to the deck of the ship. Chaps were going off their minds, they were going mad down there. Up on deck was some kind of a box for your toilets, tied onto the edge of the ship, couldn't go anywhere else. About 4 or 5 days after us, we got near the Philippines, and the Japanese had all had put 2 lots of suits on and everything else around their shoulder. They were going to desert the sinking ship when it got torpedoed by American submarines. So they stayed by the lifeboats, the Japanese, for about 2 or 3 days. But in the meantime, just past the Philippines, the sky began to blacken over and the wind whipped up, and this typhoon came along and it hit the ship. And I thought, I'm not going down the hold at any cost. So I found a staircase up to a little bridge, and I went upstairs and I held on like that, and I watched the ship going from one side to the other, being tossed about like a cork. Everything got washed away, everything. And when it settled down a little bit, we raided the Japanese stores in between times. We found rice husks, and some POWs even took Japanese clothing and started to dress up in them. And then after about 3 days, she began to drift, and we knew we're seeing because the rats started to come out from the holding, and the ship was at angles. We heard one morning this terrible crunch, and she'd been washed onto the rocks off Formosa. The Japanese Navy come along and they sent some boats in their destroyer, and going back on the destroyer, we got taken from there to a place called Moji, and from there we picked up a luxury liner, and it was called the Hakusan Maru, and worse, I described it, it was worse than anything. I should never get out, I couldn't breathe, and they shoved us down into the holds again, and we mustn't move, and it was so hot down there, and all we had was G-strings on. It was so hot, we were under the waterline, and the American subs were all around, and we laid there for near enough a week, hardly to eat or drink, and so someone else fixed a line up, and we took it in turns to pull the strings of the line to let some air get through. And then there was a light there in a corridor, one bowl, and I used to watch it swinging to and fro, and I really was losing my mind with watching that bulb all the time, day in, day out in the heat. Then we went to Japan then, and they give us baths then, and it disinfected us with baths before we went to work.
Please help to rescue and preserve more memories of the Second World War. Visit www.war-experience.org.